Hi everyone, I hope that you're well. Thank you for tuning in to this introductory episode of our new series, Fine Tuning. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Danny. As you can see, I love Coptic hymnody, and my goal for this series is to share that love for our tradition with you all. Some of the material that I may present you might already be familiar with, and some you may not be familiar with. What I share is that which I've learned from my study and from my experience, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback as well. We have some groundwork to do in this first episode, so I'll be moving quickly through the points. But again, if you have any further questions or concerns, you're welcome to reach out to me on any platform that you see this video. So the first question that I'd like to answer is, why fine-tuning? As Coptic hymnography spreads within Egypt and throughout the world, it continuously encounters various musical traditions, cultures, and minds. And despite the great emphasis in the Coptic tradition on preserving hymnody with exactitude, change is and has always been inevitable, especially in the diaspora without the grounding of trained cantors. Recent scholarship has also provided great insight into the Coptic musical system, research that can assist us in treating hot topic questions about standardization, tradition, and development. As such, I found that there is a significant need to study the Coptic musical system, acquire or at least familiarize ourselves with the mind and the training of the cantors, foster a sense of understanding and preservation amongst our people towards their musical tradition, and shift our focus a little bit from singing the hymns to offering beautiful, mindful praise to God. If I had to summarize, fine-tuning is an overview and traditioning or handing down of Coptic musical heritage. It's a space where hymnographical nuance is presented and discussed with understanding and tolerance. It's an encouragement to enhance our chant, whether it be as a soloist or in a choir. And it's a preliminary step towards the how of Coptic chant, not simply what or why. Fine-tuning is not a reason or a cause for division or commotion. فما يجيش حد يروح للشماس اللي عنده في الكنيسة ويديله بالشلوت ويقول له داني جرجس قال لي أنا مش ناقص. That's not the goal here. What we're going to be discussing, yes, we have some minutia and some detail and some musical beauty that we're going to be talking about, but none of this is cause for commotion and division. The first right in the church is the right of love, and we ought to remember that in what we do. This series is also not my way or the highway. So this is not me preaching to you on this is the only thing that should be done and you must follow what I say. It is a means for us to delve into the mind of our musical system and train in that. It is not an unbalanced focus on the letter of the law. Oftentimes we see this type of work, the dealing with the minutia, as focusing too much on the letter and not the spirit. But in actuality, when God gives the spirit in the Old Testament, especially for craft, right, for the making of the tabernacle and the items within and dedication of Solomon's temple, the spirit that's given is a spirit of skill and understanding, in order that we may be able to offer something beautiful to God. So none of what we will be discussing is taken out of context and out of the basis of the law, which is love. But in order to do our worship well, we also need to have a better understanding of it. So that's the goal here. And finally, fine-tuning is not the be-all, end-all. I am not perfect. I'm not complete. There's a lot that I lack, and I'm open to correction from any of you, especially my friends and fathers of the cantors who have trained in this material very much. And for our fellow musicians who may have more to share than what I do, certainly I'm not very equipped to talk musical terms, so I'm happy to hear from any of our musicians. This is really just the beginning. As I said before, it's a first step, but it's the beginning for me to learn more and for us to engage with one another in this type of conversation. Let's do some general principle work. The first principle that we need to really discuss is Orthodox hymnody, and Coptic hymnody in particular, is centered upon stillness and control of one's mind, body, and senses. Orthodox prayer really focuses on the ability to offer mindful and rational worship. It is not something where we do it as a hobby because we enjoy it or because we like it. It's not something that we should let carry away our mind somewhere else or be in absentia mentally and physically and emotionally. Our worship is a worship of being present. Our God is the one who is, the one who exists, the one who abides with us. And as such, we also ought to be mindfully present in what we do. What we aim to do is offer God rational worship. Worship that is rightly ordered upon his word, the logos. Right? To be logikos, to be rational, to be in the image in which God created us. To be centered or patterned on him. So we need to keep in mind, in order for our hymnody to be produced properly, we need to be mindful when we offer it and in the manner in which we offer it. Once again, Orthodox worship calls us to express our deepest self, express our emotions to God, while also being set aright by God. It's not merely a one-way expression, but it's a matter of regulation as well, where one expresses their emotion to God and in return is made into the image of God once again, is patterned again on him, is made right, put in order. And St. Athanasius, in his letter to Marcellinus on the interpretation of the Psalms, says something really beautiful, and it applies not only to the Psalms, but really to the rest of any musical worship that we do in the church. And it is in order that the melody may thus express our inner spiritual harmony, just as the words voice our thoughts, that the Lord himself has ordained that the Psalms be sung and recited to a chant. For a soul rightly ordered by chanting the sacred words forgets its own afflictions and contemplates with joy the things of Christ alone. So we see here that the melody which we express renders our inner spiritual harmony, and as such the Lord has ordained that these psalms be chanted, and the soul that's rightly ordered by the chanting forgets its afflictions and focuses on the joy of Christ alone. Likewise, St. Ignatius, in the Epistle to the Ephesians, chapter 4, says, "Wherefore your accord and harmonious love is a hymn to Jesus Christ. Yes, one and all, you should form yourselves into a choir, so that in perfect harmony, and taking your pitch from God, you may sing in unison and with one voice to the Father through Jesus Christ." So again, in the early church, we see a lot of imagery that depicts the love of the body of Christ as a choir, taking our pitch from God himself and being in harmony with one another. So this really debunks the idea that I've seen so prevalently that, how we chant doesn't matter, what we sound like doesn't matter, what matters is the Spirit. The truth of the matter is that these things go hand in hand. God gave us abilities, God gave us talents, God gave us ears to hear, and us working together and being able to lay aside our differences and support each other's talents is indicative of a healthy spirit towards one another. The idea that we give no care to what we offer to God and we pay very little attention to how we as a choir fit together and how we sing together actually speaks of a lack of harmony. And so you'll see here the final thing that I have on the slide. A soul that lacks an inner harmony and is not at peace internally will not be able to render appropriately. And with this, I'll say something, my personal experience. When we're chanting in a parish and I find myself feeling rushed or feeling tired or feeling emotionally exhausted or spiritually exhausted, or there's tension in myself or in what's around me, it's very hard to render that hymn. You can sense that as a chanter. You can sense that very clearly. And likewise, a choir that's not in tune with one another, or members that do not have peace towards each other, cannot produce a sound befitting of God's glory. So it's very important that we keep this stuff in mind, that we're not there to just fulfill a quota, to sing whatever hymns that are on the screen, to let out our emotional needs for the week or for the day, but rather to bring together the body of Christ, to constitute the body and offer something beautiful to the Father through Christ Jesus by the Holy Spirit. Another really important principle within Coptic hymnody is this balance between structure and flexibility, or what Magdalena Kuhn will call the principal melody and ornamentation. And this applies to the rituals as well as to the music, but for this particular series, my goal is really to focus more on the music itself. That is my first love, so that's where it started anyway. So what's written here on these next couple of slides is really based on the work of Magdalena Kuhn with some of my own extrapolation. And what she says is, the oral tradition is an attempt to transmit the principal melodies of chant as unchanged as possible. In syllabic melodies, indeed, only few variations can be found. In melismatic chants, on the other hand, with their ornaments and variable rhythms, there are more variations. And here we're going to turn to what these types of melodies are, and we'll give some examples. And that's where I can add a little bit to what Dr. Kuhn has written about. We see 4 different types of general melodies within our tradition today. We have recitative, and a recitative is a spoken melody almost. It doesn't have a particular meter per se. And examples of this could be the canticles or the odes in the Tazbihah, like Tote Afhos or One Hawal or any of these, or even the hymns of the priest, let's say in St. Basil's anaphora, where each person uses this sort of melody. It's not an exactitude, it's something that is spoken with a couple of notes here or there, and it's attuned based on each person's ability or each group's ability. And this allows for a variety of texts to be chanted. So, like the first host, for example, you have several verses that are quite long and several verses that are much shorter, and both of them are in this same spoken melody, sort of. Syllabic melodies are melodies where each syllable gets between 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 notes. Examples of this would be something like Asomento ki rio en, etc. Or something like Astir Magis, Astir Magis Efani. Then you have, or you can also something like the standard or the what we call الدمج of خن وشوت or maranon. So خن وشوت of شوتن جبي موين تفيهم وهبنون تشك of شوبين ومامو شي. That would be a syllabic melody. A melisma, on the other hand, would be something like the longer khan ushot, right? And the idea is that two or more notes are sung as an ornament on one particular vowel. And so you'll notice in the majority of the more authentic or the older Coptic style is that you'll have any melisma will kind of move through the words with multiple notes on each vowel, but continuously moving through. Things like Smo Pshois, Sherena Morayat, Tasbaha, Samodi, even Teoin Hikanos, all of these things would be considered melisma. And then you have an additional type of melody, which is called the vocalise. And the vocalise is an extremely long melisma that lasts from 1 to more than 15 minutes on a single vowel of a word. They are used for very deep meditation. And in Coptic hymns in particular, they have a special form that is not entirely free form. It's not improvisation. It's not unbound. But it also does allow for a type of improvisation and personal expression. So it's neither completely unbound and free, but it is also not void of personal expression. Examples of this would be like Taishur al-Hazaini. So you can tell that Taishuri on its own, as a wohem, is a melisma, right? You have multiple notes in between. So there's melisma there, albeit a shorter melisma than the ones that, the others that I mentioned. The vocalise would be something that's appended to it, let's say on Good Friday. And we spend quite a few minutes on and then aisho, etc. That would be a vocalise inserted onto a particular vowel or two within a hymn that's already a melisma. And we see that happen with other things as well, like the long Teoin Hikanos, for example. The majority of the 20 minutes or about 20 minutes or so in the beginning of the hymn is just on Te Oi, and then you jump back into the normal melisma. And so on. So this is the different types of melodies that we have. More from Magdalena Kuhn. An experienced singer adds little notes and plays with different rhythms without disturbing the basic melody. So we have a basic or principal melody that doesn't really change. And then we have notes or ornaments or different rhythms that occur that are per each cantor and his own preference and ability. And he uses these to create possibilities to ornament the chants. The diverse rhythms are also a kind of ornament. And the ornaments are important. They are part of the manner of Coptic singing, and the vocalises especially are an expression of concentrated belief and meditation. And again, vocalises are not free, unbound improvisations. Every hymn has its rules transmitted by oral tradition. The variations of the different cantors are a personal, artistic contribution to the culture of Coptic music and keeps the music tradition alive. The variations keep the music tradition alive. And this is generally what we see, even within the cantors. But we'll examine many, many cantors throughout our series. But even today, the cantors that we all know and love and are familiar with, we find variations in the way that they chant as well. So it's important to maintain this balance between structure and flexibility throughout our whole rite, with rituals as well, with other things, and particularly with the music, as this is what most people participate in. So the understanding that each of us has different abilities and different gifts, different backgrounds, different training, and allowing each person to share together with one another as opposed to arguing with one another, fighting with one another, claiming the other person is outside of what we're going to talk about next, which is called taslim. And this is one of the most hot topic words in our current generation and in Orthodoxy in general, right? The handing down, or the taslim, the traditioning, the paradosis. And so I liken this taslim to another principle. In the same way that theology is not simply a set of doctrines to be regurgitated, right? So yes, we have a set of dogmas and doctrines within the church, but those did not come out of nowhere. They were placed and expressed and articulated by the development of the theological mind. So it's those doctrines are a product of how the church as a whole, over centuries, saw fit to express their beliefs, their understanding of who God is. And they're not meant to just be regurgitated, but to be understood in context. And so, in the same way that theology is more of a mind to be acquired and trained, so also is the transmission, the taslim, of the hymns. Taslim is not vain repetition of any given hymn in particular or agreed upon way, but rather it is the cultivation of the cantor's Coptic musical mind, so that he or she may understand the core elements, the movements in the music, be able to attune various liturgical texts, and preserve the system in the Coptic rite. And the way that we currently learn hymns today, it's not systematic. It's very individualistic. So we learn this hymn, and then we learn this hymn, and then we learn this hymn. And typically we look for some sort of theological explanation when we find some sort of musical similarity. And this, unfortunately, was what was available to our generation growing up. But there's a lot more to it that research and scholarship has uncovered, and that's one of the things we want to cultivate in this series. And this mind is what allows us to differentiate between variations in taslim. So we encounter different cantors doing different things all the time. It's very hard to claim that this is taslim, this is not taslim, especially with the cantors. So we call those variations, or the way that I'd like to term them right now for this series is a variation. And these are still considered credible or authentic. And we differentiate those from what I'll try to term deviations or inaccuracies, which do not necessarily respect that tradition, that taslim, that mind of how we do chant in the church. And as we go through this series, I'll be able to explain more on how I want to differentiate those and what in my mind constitutes one versus the other. A couple more items that we need to have in our back pockets before we continue and talk about all of the rest of the hymns that we're going to discuss is the common contemporary tone system in the Bohairic tradition. A quick note on the Sahidic tradition: we don't necessarily know much about their musical style. We know that there were more than just tones 1 and 2 at some point in our tradition. We know other hymns are listed with other terminologies that are not Adam and Watus in the Sahidic tradition, and maybe even in early Bohairic tradition. In the current state that we have, these are the two main tones. The difference between a text that is Adam and music that corresponds to that text, or a text that is Watus and music that corresponds to that tone, is the number of syllables per line, or the number of beats in that line, and where these tones are used. So both Adam and Watus are typically 4-line stanzas. There are some exceptions that have come up as when we were doing psalmody work, and we found some things that are listed as Adam or Watus with 5 or 6 lines. But the general trend is that each of these two tones, the texts are written with 4 lines, and the Adam is 5 to 6 syllables. So Samodi erodikeos, versus something like Di atole ben semne. So that's how you differentiate. And Adam is called Adam because the first word of the Monday Tadakiyya, which is Adam, from Adam Adif Oi, has the letter Alpha, which is the number 1 in Coptic. And so this is what Ibn Kabar calls al-Lahn al-Awwal, the first. So tone 1. And the way that they do some sort of device here for you to remember it is that because the Monday Tadakiyya is written in tone 1 and the first word is Adam, if you want to remember what an Adam text looks like, or what a text in tone 1 looks like, then Adam Edifoy is your example. Adam Edifoy. Versus Watus, which they take from Thursday Tadakiyya. And the reason why that, a little bit of proof for why I'm saying what I'm saying is that actually the Tadakiyya starts with P Wadus, not Watus by itself. But they particularly chose this word because of the letter beta, which is the number 2 in Coptic, al-Lahn al-Thani. And so the idea is, if you want to think of what a Watus text looks like, or what a Watus tone is, then you think of the Thursday Tadakiyya, which is written in Watus. Okay? And as Ibn Kabar mentions to us, tone 1 is usually related to beginnings, tone 2 is usually related to the endings of things. And this is a general correspondence or correlation. It's not exact, but you'll find, let's say when you begin Matins or Vespers, the first hymn that you chant, the Bisharatismos, which is now known as Verses of Symbols, this is always Adam. So in meter, in tone, it's not Watus, and when you import Watus verses into the Adam hymn, the music gets messed up. And I've discussed this in another lecture. I'm happy to share the link with you if you're looking to listen to that. So you'll also find that the concluding canons, for example, of any of the services are Watus. So the beginnings of services, you typically find things that are Adam. The ending of the services, or of sections, like in the Psalmody, first and second canticles are Adam. The third is also beginning with Adam, but the Psali at the end is Watus, the conclusion, right? So you'll have this often. And you'll see the same thing with the week. So the beginning of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, is Adam, or the Tadakiyat. Sorry, let me clarify. It's not that those days are Adam, because on any of those days you will still chant Watus hymns. So it's not that if you're on Sunday you only chant Adam. You still end up chanting other things that are Watus. But rather that the Tadakiyat and the Psaliyat that were created on those days are Adam versus Watus. And those are typically what you would use depending on which service. And we have salis that are, so the usages now, we have salis that are written in tone 1. We have the gospel responses for matins of Sunday. So if you look in Tertib al-Bi'ah, they usually pull a verse from Nimgar or from Abu Christos bin Noti for the Sunday matins gospels, because the matins gospels are about the resurrection. So they'll pull from those hymns. The hymns of incense, Into Peti Shura Sharap Noti Pait of M for all Adam, and they all share tunes, and they all come from Sundays Tadakiyya. The Aspasmus Adam, you have Doxologiyat Adam, like Pioin and Tabmei or any subsequent. And the majority of the hymns in the veneration, like Kismaruot, like the doxologies that are chanted in the veneration, those are all Adam. And the Turuhat, etc. On the flip side, for the Watus, you also have Salih Watus. The gospel responses for the synaxis, so the liturgy of the word, those are usually in the Watus. The Paraliksat, we'll talk about another time, are Watus. The pre-sanctus hymn, which I've listed here as Sathem Piagius, so oftentimes it's called Aspasmus Watus, but that's not really a correct naming. For something to be an Aspasmus, it has to have the greeting, the kiss of peace, and there is no kiss of peace there. Really, it's a pre-sanctus hymn. It's a hymn chanted before the Holy, 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 or the Sanctus. You have the Watus doxologies, which we all know and sing, and the canons, as I mentioned before. For a Coptic cantor, a huge part of their role is calculation. Attuning a text in either tone 1 or tone 2 is an act of calculation that requires attention to the number of syllables and familiarity with the tone to identify the number and the location of the transitions within the music. So the music already has places embedded in it for you to be able to transfer from one syllable to the next. It's most preferable when attuning to keep rhythm, simplify transitions, and keep to what is most natural to the respective language used. What I mean by that is you want to make sure that if the entire hymn is on the upbeat, that you stick to the upbeat. You want to make sure that as much as possible, the transitions don't have to take the rest of the people chanting with you by storm. So like we were chanting last Sunday in Tasbeha, and I remember there's a piece in the current translations that says something like, "Behold, the word of the Father came and was incarnate of you," right? If you're not used to that and you don't know, automatically you're going to mess that up. There's too many syllables for that translation, per that tune, and those transitions, those movements are not natural. There's something you actually have to work very hard to figure out. And until now, even when people do it differently still. You want to make sure that there's something sort of steady in the way that you attune each verse. And of course, depending on whether you're singing in Coptic or English or Arabic or whatever other language that now the church uses, you want to keep the stresses as much as possible on like in Coptic stress, typically the stress is on the last one or two syllables of a word, but in music we're allowed to give a little bit more space. In English, a lot of times that's not really as flexible because certain words are not pronounced properly if you don't stress the right syllables. So that's something to take into consideration when attuning a text. Also, something really, really important, when we use the instrumentation, so the def, triento, the naus, whatever instruments you're using, a lot of times that can cause alteration to the general music of a hymn, because you have to account for everybody else singing with you and how that meter that's created by that rhythm and meter that's created by those instruments can shift some of the music. And there's many examples of this which we can go through, but I can think of a couple off the top of my head, like Tenoueh and Sok, for example. When we end the verses, when you say, let's Shibinan, for example, or even in the, let's say Tenoueh and Sok Kiyaki, if I'm playing the cymbals, but if I'm not, the cantors record, so that's a change, or it's a consideration that happens when I'm using instrumentation. Same thing with the Sanawi in nan, instead of no, and then people usually jump in Allah, as opposed to what's handed down, which is la. So we're going to go through these in more detail, but I just want to give examples. So the way that we play the instrumentation, depending on how many people are around us and the choir that we're trying to lead, the way that we use the instrumentation can alter some aspects of the hymn that we need to keep in mind. And then one final note on calculation. In larger groups, like I experienced last weekend, we prayed Tasbeha with a couple hundred people at the Liturgy and Life Convention, which was beautiful Tasbeha. There are certain things that I do differently than some other people, and you want to be able, or there are things that a trained choir that's meeting together regularly will be able to do that a choir that's composed of people who have not chanted together before won't be familiar with. Like small things. If I would, like the first host, for example, right, instead of or versus Hoseruf arihu, or the high verses and the low verses. These are things that you might not be able as a cantor to control throughout a particular service if the choir itself is not trained with you. Important thing here is to not stop teaching what we've been taught and what we go back and listen to and research and learn, but at the same time to account for and not to force, especially in bigger groups and services that everybody is praying and is together in, not to force a particular way so as to not distract everyone and throw everyone off. Tempo is also very, very important in Coptic hymnography. It's the rate limiting factor, so to speak, in the sense that if you don't choose it and maintain it properly, it will lead to combustion. Your hymn will blow up. And that's happened. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it. I've been the cause of it, especially when I was much younger. The hymns that have rhythmic movement necessitate the employment of instrumentation by the cantor. So it's up to the cantor to control the tempo as is needed, and he uses the instruments to do that. The instruments are not meant to be a distraction or a trophy. It's not a badge of honor. It's not a free-for-all. It's really a means of maintaining the pace so that everyone can sing together. I think there was a video that Malim Bola had a couple months back that I shared as well on this topic. It's that those leading the chant are those playing the instruments. They're the ones that have the ears trained to hear everybody in the choir, everybody in the church, and keep everybody together. And the tempo, depending, there's flexibility with this, and it changes depending on where you live and where you are and what country and what background and all that kind of stuff. But typically what I found to be an acceptable range is the tempo should keep everyone awake, but still keep the hymn intelligible. I should be able to understand what you're saying, but I shouldn't be falling asleep while you say it. Should be balanced, because everything that we do in the church is meant to be received and meant to be absorbed intrinsically into our minds and hearts. And if the person in the congregation cannot attain to what you're saying, cannot actually absorb what you're saying, there's a problem. We're doing something wrong, and it's not a requirement. So, oftentimes I'll see people in the tasbihah, will chant everything at warp speed. But then I've walked out and I don't remember anything that was said and I didn't absorb anything. I would rather chant, 3 parts of the tadakiyah instead of all 7, but understand those pieces, right? They were used to all be separate hymns, so there's nothing wrong with chanting a portion and not chanting the rest if, let's say, I'm really cut for time, but at least the people that are chanting with me understand what we just sang. And myself, and I'm not a machine. I need to pay attention and grow and understand. Let's talk about pitch for just a second. Selecting a pitch can be subjective. Different people have different abilities and different pitches that they find comfortable. But what I've found to be the general case is that the optimal pitch to start any hymn is one that allows for all the notes in the hymn to be reached, to be attained with relative ease. So, you find hymns like Hos'ero fil Kibir. There's a point. You need to be able to either hit those pitches, or you need to start at a pitch where those pitches become and you can hit them. When starting the next piece, you also don't want to do because you're going to end up في السما بعد شوية النفاوي خالص So you want to be able to find the pitch, and as time goes on and you're more comfortable, you'll find the pitch that does this, but that contains the whole hymn within the range that most people will be able to chant. You want to consider the choir in which you're chanting and whether or not the members would be able to sync up with your singing. A good rule of thumb is to begin at a pitch in which I don't feel strained. So if I'm too low and I'm forcing, I'm straining. And if I'm too high, and especially when it's very early in the morning, especially for us going to liturgy, I'd rather not damage your voices or my voices or anyone else's. And so just picking a range in which you're comfortable is probably the best place to go. If an adjustment needs to be made midway through a hymn, we want to attempt to do it with tranquility and with grace. We don't want to cut someone off. We don't want to embarrass anyone. We don't want to make anybody feel sensitive or we don't want to cause distortion. Everybody needs to be able to walk in and walk out of the church feeling peace and sanctity and in harmony with one another. Causing disruption and commotion that breaks that is really not only distracting, but it's painful, it's hurtful to people. So we really want to avoid that. So choose a place where there's a break in the hymn, there's a segmentation in the hymn, possibly give a small, one of these that we usually get from our elders, right? Just give me 1 second, دقيقة واحدة بس هظبط الموضوع ونكمل كده. لكن الخناق مش that's not our way. This is this. I was gonna have this as the final note. I have one more thing to say after this, but we'll do this one and then we'll give the final close. It is not enough to learn Hazet. We're taught Hazet. Some people like to transcribe Hazet. It's not my thing, and I'm trying not to be biased. But the idea here is the Hazet are just an introduction to the music. They're a very, very simplified way of doing Coptic music. It's simply meant to get the basic principal melody across to you. It was never meant to be the be-all, end-all. It was never meant to be the level that the hymns stay at. It was meant to help transmit the music. To present a Coptic hymn as it truly is, as it truly needs to be, we have to move past the stage of just simple, rigid readings and move into an expressive rendering. So the particular emphasis placed by preserving grace notes, which are, or crush notes, those types of notes, crescendo, decrescendo, even staccato, even rest at times, the stops that we do, they're imperative when we use our music to communicate prayer. We want to communicate something both to God, right? So what we sing and how we sing it creates a conversation interpersonally. Interpersonally with God, right? God is found within us, and intrapersonally with one another. Actually, I think I did this the opposite. Think I did the opposite. Forgive me. See, again, not perfect. So, intrapersonally within oneself, right? And interpersonally with the rest of the choir. So, we communicate something to our constituents in the parish, and we communicate something to God. We offer something to God through what we do and how we sing. And on that note, this intrapersonal versus interpersonal communication, we have a lot of antiphonal chant in the Coptic Church. Even within our melisma, sometimes there's antiphon. It really strikes me at times when I hear everyone chanting every single verse. Not because I don't like hearing everyone's voices together. I actually really enjoy that. But there has to be time for mindful meditation and contemplation, to inherit and absorb what is being prayed, to think without moving our mouths at times on what is being said. And at those times in the silence is oftentimes when the heart speaks. So it's really, really important to maintain time within our services to listen, to internalize, to pray, to reset. Aside from the physical benefits of not exhausting one's voice and not walking out with a massive headache after a 3-hour tasbihah or something like that, we really want to be able to walk out of the liturgical worship with a sense of peace and being set aright and having طلعنا اللي جوانا وخدنا حاجة تانية. We replaced what's with it, right? Taking what is God's, His peace, His tranquility, His love, His healing, and giving Him what we have to offer, the best of what we have to offer. So I really hope that we can look at the worship that we do, the singing, the chanting, the office of chant within our church as a sacred office that we're called to as a community, and begin to work at it in a different way, not just the memorization of what is to be done, but think about how we're supposed to do what we're doing and the impact that it has on us as a community. And we'll discuss this further in the rest of the series. I hope that this was beneficial. I hope that you feel that you walked out of this with something. I thank you for your time, and I ask that you keep me and this series in your prayers. And glory be to God forever. Amen.